Morning, everybody. Good morning, students. I see you back there hiding. Did you get the free food already? You're all good? Okay, looks great. So, as Aran said, my name is Mark Astley. I head the reliability engineering team. That is an infrastructure and DevOps function in Two Sigma. I've been at the company for about 10 years now. I've seen the company go from 150 people to about 1,500 people, and I've also seen our infrastructure grow from a couple of cobbled together data centers to some very large data centers at this point. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about how the company is scaled and what some of the challenges have been in terms of our infrastructure and other things like that in terms of scaling, and how some of the challenges we face sort of naturally led to us participating in an engagement like the Mass Open Cloud. Later on, I'll review some of the early successes we've had partnering with the MOC, and I'll end with what we're hoping we can do down the road. So Two Sigma is a financial advisor, so I have to show you the disclaimer slide. Suffice it to say, anything I say you should not take as financial advice. And just between you and me, if you're asking me for financial advice, you're definitely asking the wrong person at the company. So just keep that in mind. So just a quick overview of Two Sigma. So we were originally founded as a hedge fund almost 20 years ago now. These days, we don't call ourselves a hedge fund anymore. We call ourselves a diversified financial services provider. We manage about $58 billion. So if you like lists, we're in the top 5 in terms of hedge funds in assets under management. What we're known for in finance is using data-driven approaches and quantitative strategies, and these days we apply those strategies to a variety of different things, not just trading. For example, about a year ago we created a insurance business, which is a very different sort of thing for us to do, but it's using some of the underlying strategies we developed for other parts of the business. So the short version of what we do is we combine a massive amount of data with a pretty massive amount of compute these days as well. We sprinkle in a little bit of financial insight, and we, out of that, create various strategies, mostly for trading, but for other businesses as well. So as Aran mentioned, in contrast to many other finance companies or related companies, we also staff a research lab. So we explore all kinds of subjects, many of them computer science, and many of our staff have advanced degrees, including PhDs in computer science and so on. So that also made it sort of natural for us to engage in some academic circles. In terms of participating with the Mass Open Cloud, we've done a variety of things. Aran mentioned some of them. I'll cover a few of them later on as well. And with that, let's talk about how things have changed for Two Sigma. So one way to understand how we ended up participating in the MOC is to understand how Two Sigma has changed over the years. So at heart, Two Sigma provides financial analysis and strategies by combining data and compute power. So there are two basic sides to our business. There's a data acquisition side, which is focused on acquiring data, and there's a modeling and analytics side, which is focused on taking that data, trying to build models, and then ultimately build some sort of strategy or trading strategy usually. There's also, of course, a market trading side of the business, but the scaling challenges for that side of the business are quite different than what the challenges are for data and compute. So I'm not going to talk about them for simplicity, but of course it does exist. So the data side is mostly concerned with acquiring data, cleaning it, and then providing it to our modeling teams to use. And 10 years ago, most of the data came from the market, certain vendors, and other curated sources. It was a very sort of controlled model for getting data. The data sets would get fed into the modeling side, and they would focus on trying to find some value in the data. And ultimately, once you come up with a strategy, in order to have confidence in it, you have to also make sure it stands the test of time, which means a back test. And that's where a lot of the compute power ends up getting used, or it did 10 years ago anyway. So our business essentially grows, or grew from 10 years ago, by finding new opportunities in new data. Each new data source that we find paints a more complete picture of what the financial world looks like and creates new opportunities. So the platform that we built 10 years ago relied heavily on technology and automation. And in fact, a lot of the early success of the company, you could argue, came from strong early investments in our technology and the ability to scale the technology. So 10 years ago, scale was pretty manageable. We had maybe hundreds of data sets, and on a given day, we might process tens of gigabytes a day. And we didn't need much more than, say, 10,000 cores of CPU and maybe 50 terabytes aggregated memory to do what we needed to do. So in 2008, those were pretty big numbers, and like I said, we had to invest pretty significantly in technology. But at the end of the day, most of the challenge was just the physical scaling, and we actually felt pretty good about our ability to do that. And as a side benefit, because of the investment we had to make, we felt pretty good about the competition as well. Any other company that was going to compete with us was going to have to put in a lot of time and money to sort of catch us up. So there was this nice bar that prevented disruption from the other two sigmas out in the world. But of course, as most of you know, within a few years, well less than 10 years, all of this changed quite a bit. All right, so let's fast forward to today. So our scale has grown quite a bit. The business kind of looks the same. On the data side, though, we not only have more data sources, we have more types of data source. So there's a lot of data that we gather ourselves now. A lot of it is unstructured data. And the data has scaled up by an order of magnitude. So from hundreds of data sets to thousands of data sets now. On the compute side, we've also added things like machine learning. You may have heard of it before. And we also had to add a new type of compute in the forms of GPUs to build strategies in this area. Compute has also grown by an order of magnitude. And these are pretty large numbers, 100,000 cores. That's a pretty impressive number. But the more important change here is not the scale, but how the data is acquired and also how people are getting to that scale. So the first thing that happened is many other people in many other businesses, not just finance, quickly understood the value of data. And so these days, it's now easier than ever before to acquire data. Many of the public cloud vendors have advertised that they're offering data sets, some of them crossing into the financial world, some crossing into other areas. Some of them are offering it for free, some of them are charging a fee, and so on, but it's easy to get these days. And there are academic projects as well. We're going to hear about some of them later today. Later today. Some of them are very close to home. So the other big change is that everybody's going to the public cloud these days. So all the major public cloud vendors are offering various levels of infrastructure as a service. And an important change is that some of the best technology is now only available in the cloud. So if your thing is TensorFlow and you want to use Google's chips, maybe IBM someday, but Google's chips for now, you've got to go to Google's cloud to get them. They're not available anywhere else. So as a result of this, the ability to just build a big infrastructure, that's no longer table stakes in Two Sigma's business anymore. The next Two Sigma out there won't build any data centers at all. They're just going to go to the cloud, and they're going to catch up with our capacity in one day if they really want to. And the other problem is the next Two Sigma, they're not going to have to go and do what we did to get the original data we got. They're going to be able to get it at public data sources. So now this is nothing in particular that's a stressor for Two Sigma. There are many other financial companies or technology companies that are in the same boat. But it's pretty clear if we just keep focusing on the old scaling problems, we're going to stagnate and fall behind. So to remain competitive, we need to start focusing on these new problems of acquiring data and getting access to scale and resources where they live rather than just putting them in our own data center. So what's pretty clear to us these days is we're going to need to operate a hybrid infrastructure rather. It won't necessarily be on-prem plus public cloud. It may be on-prem and multi-public cloud. And we need to do that so that we can scale as quickly as anybody else and get access to the same resources, and also so we can access the bespoke resources. So beyond the scaling issue, it's now an agility issue. Sure, we can keep building data centers all day long and spending money on getting resources, but we also need to move faster and change much faster than we have before. So that's sort of our new challenge. So just to sort of summarize or put it down a little bit more concretely, the first big challenge now is it's a distributed world. So 10 years ago, developing a model with a bunch of data, you could easily do that on one big machine. But the models we develop these days, that's no longer really possible. So we're finding that we need to aggregate compute and memory across multiple machines, and use platforms like Spark is a good example of a platform that we're using now to do this. So the good news is we're still in the range of only connecting, say, tens of machines together to do something, but we expect that's going to scale up pretty quickly. I don't think it's going to stay that way for very long. The second related challenge is that data is also scaling. So the data that we use for a given problem, 10 years ago, it wasn't that much. We could fit it on a couple of machines if we needed to. These days, the models that we're developing use a lot more data. And it's getting to the point now where these single file system abstractions like NFS and stuff start to fall apart. They don't make sense anymore. So we need to move to new storage systems. And what we're seeing also is that things like locality of the data is becoming much more important. So it's becoming important now to define strategies which go where the data is to do the compute, certainly during the training phase. A third challenge is we need to start casting a wider net for data. So for curated data, what's becoming clear now is that the playing field just got very level. So it's pretty easy to get a significant amount of pretty solid data without investing very much. I just talked on the last slide about how many companies and other providers are starting to give this data out or make it accessible. So new value, therefore, is likely to come from uncurated data, much of which we may acquire ourselves, and also from pretty unique sources, not just financial sources anymore. We're looking much more broadly now for data these days. And of course, any data-driven strategy is only as good as your confidence in the data or the quality of the data. And so as a result of this, we're fairly certain that things like data provenance are going to be much more important. There have been some highly publicized failures in the financial industry and trading and so on in the past couple of years. Some of those had to do with quality control on the trading strategies, but some of them also had to do with the quality of the data that people were acting on. So as we go get our own data and we can't rely on somebody else to curate the data for us, we need to build this muscle or strengthen this muscle about reasoning about the provenance of our data. And sort of the last change here that we see, or the challenge, is hybrid environments are going to dominate. So we're going to need to adopt to a hybrid environment where strategies are going to be developed using some interconnection of technology platforms. And we think the most capable platforms out there will blend the best features from each environment, but in doing so are likely going to challenge every existing security axiom that's out there. So we'll need new security processes as well, which leads into this idea of the provenance of your hardware. So just like you worry about the provenance of your data, we think you're going to want to reason about the provenance of your hardware, who used your hardware before you got to it, especially in the public cloud, how confident are you in it in terms of security, and so on. Okay, so where does the mass open cloud fit in? Well, the list of challenges I just read, you could almost find word for word in the founding charter for the MOC. So our participation at this point might be kind of obvious. It's fun. You should go back and look. I think there was quite a bit of insight into how the charter was written. It anticipated a lot of these things I just mentioned. But to give you a little bit of perspective on how we think about the mass open cloud and how we participate, there's a couple of things that we think about. So the first is we need, as a 2 Sigma, needs a place to experiment with new ideas and new configurations. We could certainly do this all ourselves, but that would be pretty inefficient for a couple of reasons. One is you're going to compete for resources inside the company, and every company has this problem, so that's nothing new. It's also inefficient, though, because this is a problem that many other companies are facing, both in finance and out. And so we're missing an opportunity to participate in a wider community. Now, this is a weird thing for somebody from finance to say. We're normally known as a very sheltered, closed-in culture. But on the engineering side of the company, this is how we tend to think about things, is there's a broader community. It's smarter for us to invest in that community rather than try and discover everything ourselves. And that's why we've built parts of the company to do that, like our research lab, for example. So what we get by participating in the MOC is 2 big things. First, it gives us a way to diversify our bets on technology and innovation. That is, we can go and have a part of the company that's working with the MOC on something that's not very correlated with what other parts of the company are doing. And the second thing is we can join this broader community where we know we'll certainly get ideas that we didn't think of before coming from other industry partners or even academia. And also, it gives us an opportunity to avoid being constrained by these entrenched ideas we have in our own company that reflects how we built our own infrastructure. We'll be able to also pursue some agendas that we might not otherwise pursue, either because, say, if we want to go to the public cloud, they're trying to steer you in a certain direction, whereas maybe we want to try something new. The other thing to say is something Aran touched on before, which is we have this opportunity to build and experiment with scale models of our infrastructure, and that's pretty valuable to us. So for example, we can experiment with data and compute scaling problems in a simulated environment. We can also experiment with ideas like this data bazaar idea, where we have to make a model where we acquire data from some strange source, something we're not used to, and work out all the process to get it into our system. And finally, we can experiment with some new and sometimes more advanced secure compute capabilities that we otherwise wouldn't normally do. All right, so just to quickly sort of summarize our participation so far. So we've participated since day one in the MOC. One of the first things we did is we designed and mentored some of the student projects in some of the classes at BU. One of the first projects we did was around serverless compute on OpenStack. And that work led to a presentation at the OpenStack Summit last year. We also had another project that experimented with serverless compute and data locality. So the idea there was to actually move compute closer to data sources in a multi-cloud environment. So that was kind of interesting. We also have created lots of collaboration and partnerships between MOC staff and 2 Sigma staff and students. We make pretty regular site visits. We've had people from MOC come down to 2 Sigma and talk to some of our engineers. We've also been up here several times. And we have Larry Rudolph, who's somewhere, I saw him. He's a pretty regular visitor to BU. He's available to advise both students and faculty on various research topics. We've also done quite a bit of sort of collaborative research that have resulted in publications of various kinds. So for example, we collaborated with students and faculty to investigate storage performance at data center scale. This work resulted in a Usenix poster session this year, and I believe there's a Eurosys submission for next year. And one of the nice things about this project, and in general being an MOC partner, but also a company that runs our own large infrastructure, is that we are able to contribute some of our own learnings in this space. And so, for example, in this paper, we were able to contribute some of the traces that we see in our own system, which is the first graph you see in this image up here. So that's actually from our data. A second project that we've recently done is we've collaborated on researching allocation of cloud resources in a way that lets tenants verify various security properties. And that research resulted in a paper at Hot Cloud this year. So security is an example of one of those topics where it's fairly critical, we think, that we leverage our academic and mostly infrastructure partners, industry partners in this case, because this is a topic that's really critical to us. And it's an inhibitor in many cases for 2 Sigma to go to places like the public cloud because we're not really sure about their stance on security. And in fact, in the past, when we've talked to the various clouds about how far they're getting, we see that they tend to lag. Maybe this isn't surprising. You can sort of safely assume that the cloud providers are always going to focus on performance and features because that drives a lot of their business and price too. But we found, at least at 2 Sigma, that security has been lagging. And so we like projects like this because it gives us an opportunity to find some innovation and then try and push it to the clouds and say, look, this thing that we've done here, this is really important to us. And by the way, there's some research already. If you want to start investigating in it or looking into it, we can help with that. So we're hoping that research collaborations like this one and others will help focus more attention in this space. It's definitely relevant for us. So just to close up on some future goals or things that we hope to see going forward. So we've had a really great collaboration so far. I guess just to list some of the things we'd like to do going forward. One of our goals is to start exploring deeper partnerships with our peers and in the founding committee for MOC. The trends that we're seeing in this space, I think, affect all of us. So it seems like there are opportunities to try and shape that future together. So far, we've had our heads down in sort of the plumbing of the mass open cloud, which is a lot of fun, but it would be nice also to talk to some of our peers and also the users and customers of the MOC sort of further up the stack. We have capacity for additional academic engagement, and so therefore we'd like to explore collaboration with some of the other academic partners in this area as well. Sort of a more researchy topic is increasing collaboration and exploration in the machine learning space. This is something that 2 Sigma has started investing in pretty heavily. Many people in finance are doing the same thing. It's not particularly new. It's certainly the hot new thing, but there's obviously a lot of pay dirt there as well. So an interesting sort of meta question we have is whether machine learning strategies are going to kind of go the route that data has gone, which is to say, will there be some menu of easily accessible and well-trained machine learning strategies out there that are very easy for people to get and use? So if such a thing were to happen, that has sort of interesting implications for 2 Sigma in terms of what sort of market participation and really competition we're going to see in the future. So that's at least one interesting question we have. And finally, we think there's room to increase our engagement with the students at the MOC. These projects are incredibly fun for our staff to do. It gives us a chance to work with people working on interesting topics, and students have a lot of energy. So the 2 Sigma staff really enjoys doing those types of projects. So we're hoping we can increase that as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I will turn it over to Iran. Thanks.